to interview you for so long now.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad we could finally connect.
Thank you very much for having me, Karl. That's great. Yeah.
Tell me about your dad and your mom. What were they like?
Mom and Dad were had a great sense of humor, and I think they influenced all of us, because my sister Kathy is also involved in the comedy world, and my sister Mary Wynn is, we always say she's the funniest one in the family, and my brother Michael was a filmmaker, and my mother really had, kind of like she was a kitchen comedian, I always say, and she was one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. I still think she is maybe the funniest person, and she was, like I always say, I can never tell that many stories about Mom, but I do remember if we ever had friends come to Newfoundland to visit us, people we met in the mainland or whatever, the first thing we did was bring them to meet Mom. Guaranteed they were going to get a laugh. Guaranteed, no matter what it was, no matter what mood Mom was in at the time, because Mom did suffer from mental illness herself. She had agoraphobia, very severe agoraphobia, so she didn't go out for many, many years after my sister was born, actually, Kathy. So she was quite a character, and she did a lot of stuff from the phone because she wouldn't go out. And so she just had such a rare sense of humor, and she was good on, she was witty on the quick uptake. And my father had a great sense of humor also. He was very dry and a bit sarcastic, actually, which I liked. But he also had a good sense of humor. And, we had lots of family problems and stuff like that. But generally speaking, I felt like I was loved by my parents. That was.
So tell me about school. Did you go to St. Bon's?
Yes, I did. Yes,
okay.
yeah.
So what was school like?
I was a good boy in school. I always worked hard, and I was, I was maybe a goody-goody. I don't know, but I did well in school, and I was that 20% of people who, that school is made for in a way. And I liked being there. I liked being at St. Bon's, and there were, I look back on it with some horror now when I think about how we were taught about heaven and hell and all that stuff, and I think of young kids now. Thank God they don't have to go through that.
It was pretty scary.
It was terrifying, actually. I sure didn't realize it until I got to be older and started writing about it a bit. But my general memory is a positive one in terms of academically. I always did well, and also school was a place where I got a lot of chance to do drama and theater and stuff like that. At St. Bon's, we were always doing stuff like that, and then eventually at Gonzaga, we got to do Shakespeare and stuff like that. So I do remember that, and in those days, there wasn't much media and stuff like that, so a lot of our interest came from what we were doing in school.
So is that where you got hooked on acting?
Yes, probably. I know my dad, when he was young, he was from Harbour Grace, and he used to act in the plays in Harbour Grace. And my uncle Andrew, who was, I was really close to, his brother, he was, really well known as an amateur actor in Harbour Grace. There was always talk of plays growing up, and famous things that happened on stage in Harbour Grace and stuff like that. So that's probably where I got the first thing, and then the school picked up on that. The school system was great for that in those days. I think it still is, but yeah, probably.
So when was it that you made the decision that you were going to study theater in university?
Well, I kind of didn't know in high school. I didn't know exactly how you could do that. It sort of felt like that was something English people did or Americans. And then, so I went to university and did English, and then it was during university at St. Mary's in Halifax, actually, that I got involved in the theater there. In the theater, it was actually Brian O'Day, who was a well-known Newfoundland guy. He actually dragged me down to an audition at St. Mary's. And I didn't want to go, but he kept, he said, "This guy's really funny. You want to get him?" So he was very bold, and so I got a part in that first play at Stalag 16 or 17, whatever, Stalag, whatever it was, and I played Schultz in that play, at St. Mary's. And then I kind of started thinking I would like to do this. And then I did theater at the University of Toronto for a year, and then I did theater at the University of Alberta for a year. Then I went teaching for a year to pay off some of my student loans, and then I jumped immediately right into being an actor. I just decided I was going to go to Toronto, and actually turned out I got a job here first. And then I never turned.
So what was your first acting job here?
The very first job a bunch of us had, myself, Bob Joy, Mary Walsh, Diane Olson, Tommy Sexton. Our first professional job we ever had was with the Newfoundland Traveling Theatre Company, which was a great little company in St. John's, run by Dudley Cox and David Weiser. David has sadly since died.
Dudley Cox, I haven't heard that name in years.
Yeah, Dudley was back a few years ago, really? Came back to St. John's.
Wow.
And David, of course, was Jonathan Monroe's dad. So we had that little company, and we traveled around Newfoundland in June 1972 it was, in June and July of that year. And then I went directly, myself and Bob Joy left together and went right to Toronto and started, I got a job within a few months at Theatre Passe-Muraille.
You went to London, right?
Yes, then just by chance, the second show I got in Toronto was directed by an English director who came and auditioned me, and I got a part in this little show called Pilk's Madhouse. And
that was Ken Campbell.
It was Ken Campbell, yeah, and a really brilliant guy, one of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. And then while we were doing the show, we were pretty raw, young Canadian actors, barely even actors. Some of us, one guy was a musician, another guy was a puppet operator, and the woman was, I don't know that she'd ever acted before. Anyway, Ken asked us to come to England because his company had split up while he was there. And, he didn't prepare us for the fact that we were going to a very prestigious theater in London. It was upstairs at the Royal Court in Sloane Square in London. So it was like,
that sounds impressive.
Well, it was a fringe theater. Yeah. The upstairs was a fringe theater, but the downstairs was one of the most famous theaters in England. Yeah. And Ken had also had brilliantly successful shows 2 years before that, and the show was a disaster. We were so,
Were you reviewed?
We were reviewed, Karl. The reviews, my God. I have them somewhere. I don't know where they are, but it's like the worst reviews you can imagine. It wasn't that they were bad reviews. It was that they were so heartbroken that it was so disappointing. The Financial Times in London said, "What on earth has happened to the Ken Campbell Roadshow?" That was the thing. It was terrible. But I was so mad at Ken because he didn't tell us, that we were doing material that they'd already done. In fact, Bob Hoskins, the famous British actor,
right.
He had been in the company. I was doing characters that Bob Hoskins had created, didn't even know it. And so I saw.
So there was that immediate comparison, I guess.
Oh yeah. And it was just like we were just. I mean, talk about green. Oh my God, we were just green as we could. We couldn't burn us. We were so green, and I remember being so mad. But Ken was that type of guy. He was such an interesting guy. But I'm sure he did it on purpose to say, well, I'll give these guys an interesting experience, which he did. And as mad as I was at him at the time, I eventually realized it was one of the best experiences I ever had. And we kind of did get it together a bit eventually. And in fact, an American guy who had been in this company saw us and then asked us to join him. Then we formed our own company called the Madhouse Company.
Right.
Did the same material and did it very well. And we got a few other English actors to come along with us. But that was quite an experience. But it turned out to be good in the end.
That was a heady time. That was the 70s, right?
That was 1970. We performed the Christmas of '72.
Yeah.
At the Royal Court, upstairs at the Royal Court, and downstairs, Samuel Beckett's play was being done. Krapp's Last Tape, and Samuel Beckett. I've told this story before because it's my famous personal story. We were rehearsing one day. And I didn't even know who this guy was. The guy came in the back and was watching us rehearse. And one of the Irish actors was with us, "Don't look now, boys, but that's Sam Beckett at the back of the theater." So he came and watched us. So, Yeah, that was an experience for sure.
Yeah. But how long did you stay in London?
I stayed for, then I went home after Christmas of '72. I went back home for a couple of months, and then then myself and Mark Weil, his name was, and a British actor called Marcel Steiner, and Elizabeth Walensky, we all got together and started a new company.
Mm-hmm. And
we stayed for a whole year. I stayed for a whole year.
Yeah.
And then we went back, then we had a gig in the States in New York at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. And then we went to Philadelphia, and between New York and Philadelphia, I came back to Newfoundland.
Oh, okay.
And Codco had started.
Ah.
And, so of course they had asked me to come, and I couldn't because I was already booked. And so I was not there. I was not a founding member of Codco.
Was Kathy in Codco?
Yeah,
then?
yes.
Yeah. So what was that experience like? Working with your sister and.
Oh,
well, all of these other people, of course, you knew them anyway, right?
I had worked with Mary. I only met Mary
Yeah.
because of the first tour in Newfoundland with the Newfoundland Traveling Theatre Company. And of course, I knew Bob, and Bob and I lived together in Toronto. Actually, Bob had joined because, of course, he's got the great story, really. The greatest story of all is how he gave up his his Rhodes Scholarship to join Codco.
Yeah.
And that's Bob's story to tell. So I did. And Tommy, I'd known a little bit I knew who he was from school, and of course, then I toured with him. And Kathy was my sister, and Greg and I were best friends from grade 1, 1954. So it was, I don't know, I'd never had an experience like that before. It was like we were just, we just spent all day laughing, and telling jokes and telling all about our family life and all about our past and trying to analyze our education and our teachers. And we were only in our 20s. Tommy was a teenager and Kathy was a teenager. Yeah. So we were just exploring all this stuff, and the world was changing so much. It was, the '60s had just happened, and there was this big, post-colonial thing happening in Canada where we were trying to make our own material, so we were, on that bandwagon. We were on that thing, and plus we were. We were the first Newfoundlanders who were Canadians to come of age as Canadians.
Of course, yeah.
And so we wanted, and then of course, we were kind of, at that point, the joke people of Canada, which we found very difficult. We wanted to, of course, we loved Newfoundland and there were such incredible things about Newfoundland people didn't know about, right? And what a rich culture we had. So we kind of made it our job, as Chris Brooks and Lynn Lundy with the Mummers Troupe and Figgy Duff did with their music, was to find all this stuff and discover it and study it and then present it to ourselves, and then to bring it to Canada to show that, like I always said, that we were bringing lots of gifts to Canada besides the gifts that they gave us, right? Which they did give us great gifts, of course.
So, but you weren't on the Codco television series that long, were you? Did you
I was on the first year, though.
Yeah.
First, I can't remember how many, 4 seasons.
But I remember
you
kind of abruptly left. I was always wondering what happened there.
Well, really, what happened was, I, protested the fact that they wouldn't put on a sketch that was making fun of Catholic priests. I, probably wasn't a very smart thing to do because they didn't back down. In fact, I quit. Rather than go, and they didn't beg me to come back.
So I think WGB actually probably ran into some of that trouble as well. But anyway, that's another story for somebody else.
Yeah, no. I mean,
But I think
the fact of the matter is, that CBC is pretty open, and that company that made the Codco TV series, Salter Street Films in Halifax, we couldn't be far out enough for them.
Yeah.
They wanted anything we could do. There was no sense of
but it was the broadcaster that objected.
It was the broadcaster in the end, yeah, not that company in Halifax. Michael Donovan, really encouraged us to go as far as we could, and to, be really on the edge, which we were for the most part. But that one always worried me because I thought, and this was at the time of the Mount Cashel inquiry and stuff like that too. So
Yeah.
anyway, I did that.
Your spouse, Mary Lynn, is also an actor,
Yes.
and
Yep.
I was just wondering, have you ever collaborated on anything, or
Yes.
do you criticize each other's work, or
Oh,
what's that
Mary Lynn's involved in-
relationship
yeah.
with? Or like?
Mary Lynn's involved in everything I do pretty well. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. You know, she's really my sounding board for pretty well everything. And we have done lots of shows together over the years. One of the first things we ever did was, which I played with, that was just on the other day, which was The Boar by Chekhov. We did when we first got together. We did a show, an absurdist show called Six Gums Headed for Tulsa. And we are currently touring our puppet show. We're still, since 2007 or 8, we've been doing a puppet show. And we still tour that. In fact, we just did it recently at Bishop Field. And we're going to be doing it again this summer in Hans Harbor and also in Buena Vista. So we have worked together on lots of things. And we've also co-written a performance piece based on one of my other books called Jack and Mary in the Land of Thieves. So we've always worked together and toured together, and you know, but mostly Mary Lynn was a stay-at-home mom, and so she did a lot of the child rearage in the early days.
Before we go, I'd like to talk about something quite serious, and
Yeah.
it's about the passing of Louis, your son.
Yes. Yes.
He, I guess, it was a case where he could no longer live with his mental illness.
Yes.
And
He took his own life
yeah.
eventually. Yes. Yeah.
And when did you realize that he had a problem?
Really, you know, when you know, I guess when we realized it was serious was when he was about 13, I guess, and we thought, you know, I mean, we spent so many nights, you know, in the middle of the night looking over Marilyn, we'd be awake and I'd be awake, and we'd go like, what's going on here? And then, you know, the question is this mental illness? Was a big question in our mind. I mean, we weren't 100% sure at that point, but eventually it became obvious that it was. And but really, you know, Louis was always really on the edge too, right? You know, like myself in many ways. But he, you know, it took the form of being, he was cutting edge, and he was, you know, a leader of the other kids and got them to do lots of good stuff. You know, he would organize hockey games, and he was a good athlete, real good athlete, and so he was involved in that world, and he was very funny, and he was a great presence in that sports world for sure, and then, you know, he began to lose that and get into trouble, and then, you know, when he was about 13, in grade 8, he started to have trouble at McDonald Drive, and then grade 9, and he really he barely finished grade 9, and then we were on the way then, for sure.
Was he able to express to you what was going on?
Yes, actually, Louis was quite self-aware, and although, you know, he was diagnosed as schizophrenic, and you know, and he had many diagnoses: schizophrenia and OCD, and borderline personality disorder, and bipolar, and schizoaffective disorder, but he was. I always say that he was self-aware, always, and knew, even with his OCD, his obsessive compulsive disorder thoughts, which were quite extreme and were, as he said himself, they raped his brain, is the way he put it. He said, "My brain is raping me," or those thoughts are raping my brain. He still was aware that they were just thoughts, and you know, he tried all the exposure and response therapy, which is a standard procedure for that kind of treatment, and he did all the exercises and stuff like that, but it was so devastatingly difficult. And he had what some people call pure obsessive compulsive disorder, which is just intrusive thoughts, constant intrusive thoughts, inappropriate sexual thoughts, inappropriate thoughts of violence, inappropriate thoughts of just saying the wrong thing, any kind of inappropriate thought was in his mind, and then what happens is you become fearful that you're going to do it, which of course people never do, and eventually then you shut down because you can't go out, you can't do anything because you're so afraid you're going to do these things that are in your mind, which of course, it's not people like that who do those things, it's people who are sociopathic who do those things, because usually people with OCD are overly empathetic. So he suffered terribly from that, and eventually, and I understood totally, why he did it. In the end, he took his own life, and we were, of course, and still are, and will forever be devastated by that. But at first, I think my first reaction was that I understood why he did it, and then as time went on, then you begin to feel sorry for yourself eventually and thinking, oh my God, but really, I mean, we have suffered, but man, nothing like he suffered.
And nothing helped, none of the therapies, none of the drugs helped?
I think the short answer is no. Now, maybe at some point, some things might have helped for a while, but it seems to me, I'm going through his medical records right now, I'm trying to find something in them. And it seems to me if you take Louis' trajectory, when he was, from the time he was 13 until he died, I think although there's some little ups here and there, but basically the overall line is going down.
I remember at the time, you did some interviews and you talked about the lack of empathy and lack of support for people with mental illness. Has anything improved? I think there is lots of empathy within the system too, and it's. I guess the thing I talked about a lot was the fact that his friends kind of abandoned him in a way. He was too much for them to handle, I guess, and that people are, who are in the Waterford at Christmas time, the parking lot's pretty well empty, it seems to me, and so often when people have mental illness, people pull away from them. That's the thing that I found very, very difficult. I met hundreds of people within this system and fellow patients too who were very empathetic, but the system itself needs, so much work, and it needs so much more resources for people who are in prison too who suffer from mental illness, and that's a terrible, terrible aspect of our culture. And we need research. The research is very, very sparse in the mental health world compared to other illnesses, so that's the thing that really I felt, although I can't specifically say this should be done or that should be done, I wish I could, but I think some people do know some of that who are in the system now. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a new willingness to get involved, I think, and to start to solve some of these problems. But it's a big leap, and it's, people with mental illness are generally not in a great position to fend for themselves and to fight for their rights. They need advocates.
They need advocates, but they also need to be listened to. So it can't be top down. It's got to be, they've got to have a voice in this. And there are some countries in the world that have figured this out. And certainly in the in the Scandinavian countries, as usual, they've figured out a lot of stuff in terms of engaging people with mental illness in their own treatment and in the system. But it's, it just needs a lot of attention, which it's not getting.
One final question. Your daughter Martha is an actor.
Yes, yeah.
How did you react when you heard that she wanted to become an actor?
Well, you know, I of course, you know, I didn't have much to say anyway. But you know, I'd be very cautious for anybody who's wanting to go into this business, because you really, really got to want to do it. And if you don't want to do it, don't do it. I mean, there's lots of other things to do. But it's financially, it's really a grind for sure, and the lifestyle can be quite difficult at times. But on the other hand, there's great aspects to it when you get to do what you want to do, and you know, and I've had a very fulfilling career, and I've done lots of stuff that I loved, and you know, and being in Canada, I got to be in a series that we got to write ourselves on the national broadcasting network, and a bunch of other feature films and movies, and so this is a great country we live in, and as much as we complain about it, but we get to do all the stuff, so you know, it can be very fulfilling. But you know, I guess I always wish that she'd wanted to be a dentist.
Well, we're certainly very, very happy that you stuck with it, Andy Jones.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.